All right, we're going to go ahead and I'm starting the recording now. So I would like to introduce Julie. Julie Masters, she is a Ph.D. She's a gerontologist and professor at the University of Nebraska-Omaha. She holds the distinguished Terry Haney Chair of Gerontology. Julie teaches, she's very busy. She teaches courses in gerontology and death and dying. She also works with students on independent research topics and honors theses. In addition to teaching, Julie is involved in research related to end-of-life planning, along with the research on COVID-19 and its effects on aging adults. So that was just another thing you got to throw in on your plate this last couple of years.
Right.
So,
well, everybody did, right?
Yeah. She's also active in the community, serving on various advisory committees and boards, focused on aging adults, and is a frequent presenter on aging issues and end-of-life planning in the community. Julie, we welcome you and thank you so much for coming today.
Well, Jan, thank you. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. I also want to just say thank you to everyone for participating. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and so that you can see the slides. As an academic, I need slides in front of me, but hopefully you'll find the information of value and I can provide these slides to Jan after the presentation, if that would be useful. So if you will, Jan, if you could give me permission to share my slides. Thank you very much. So while we are getting ready to do that, just so folks know that what I want to do today is talk about caregiving as a time of grace, and talking about what the numbers are in terms of the numbers of people that we have serving as caregivers, and then also to talk a little bit about, again, those grace moments, but then also to talk about some things that I think will be helpful to you. I will reinforce some of the information that, by the way, Jan did a beautiful job in presenting. So I will reinforce that for you as well. So I really do think that caregiving is a time of grace. There is no doubt in my mind about that. But I think the grace is realized because of the people in our lives. And I want to make sure that I just take a second, express my gratitude, Jan, to you for this invitation. That was so generous of you to even reach out. So I'm grateful. And I also want to say thank you to Connections Area Agency on Aging. The one thing, and as I was listening to you talk about the area agencies on aging across the country, it absolutely amazed us based on the research that we've been doing, how quickly area agencies on aging pivoted to serve aging adults during the pandemic. And if you ever needed a model of efficiency and tremendous execution of services, I think the area agencies on aging across the country, of course, in Iowa and Nebraska, are tremendous models of that. So anyways, a tip of the hat, hats off to Connections Area Agency on Aging, Jan, and to you for your work with caregivers. I also want to express my gratitude to family caregivers for giving it their all. To be a caregiver it's a privilege and it's an opportunity. And also it can sometimes be a challenge. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but I just want you to know how much I appreciate what you do each day. And then also to professional caregivers, those people who may be serving in an administrative capacity, those people that are providing direct practice, direct service. Thank you for what you do to make a difference in the world. Now, no presentation about caregiving would be complete if I didn't include the image of this beautiful soul, and that is Sarah Rowan. And Sarah Rowan is a friend. She's someone one day when we have a chance for me to engage in idle chit chat, I'll tell you how I got to meet her. But she is just an amazing person. She's an emeritus board member with the Eden Alternative, working with Bill Thomas and others. And she was a caregiver to her husband who had Alzheimer's disease. And she one day said, as part of a presentation she gave for our department, she said that caregivers are holy people doing holy work. And I think there are times when you wonder, am I doing the right thing? Do I know what I'm doing? Am I making a difference? I want you to remember Sarah's words. You are a holy person doing holy work. Okay. So the objectives for this presentation will be that you will learn the latest caregiving numbers and why the caregiver is more important than ever. You will also gain some insight into caregiving numbers and what that means. Gaining insight into caregiving as a time of grace when you're supporting a loved one. And then I'll also offer you some suggestions that will reinforce what Jan has shared with you and hopefully provide a little additional information beyond that. I also want to call your attention that there is a little figure here. And when you see that on a slide, that is my cue to you, and I'll say it out loud, but it's my cue to you to say, do you want to chat? Is there something that you want to add? If you've been on a Zoom call before yourself, you might be very well aware that sometimes sometimes things work in such a way that you wish that you could contribute. And unfortunately, I am not seeing the Zoom feature. Excuse me, I'm seeing the Zoom feature. Here we go. I've got the chat up now on my screen. So if you'd like to include some information, I can look at that as well, and we can continue. All right. So I like fainting goats. I've never seen a fainting goat. I just know about fainting goats. And apparently fainting goats are just these wonderful creatures that literally will faint at the drop of a hat. And I think sometimes when I think about caregiving is not for the faint of heart. Anyone who's been a caregiver, anyone who has served in a professional capacity or led a caregiving group knows it's not easy. And how many of you, if I were to ask you, how many of you could identify with this idea that caregiving is not for the faint of heart? How many of you would say that's true? And by the way, here's our little chat button. So that tells us we can chat. Anybody? Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that kind of input. So it really is. Yep, there's Laura who said, yep. Thank you, Laura. Okay, Lori, thank you so much. So when we have folks who can acknowledge that, and that's part of finding the grace, is when you yourself can see that it's not for the faint of heart, it puts things into a different perspective. Now, as a gerontologist, as someone who thinks about aging, who thinks about caregiving, I also think about numbers, because numbers make things real. And one of the things that is getting the attention of not only gerontologists, but people in the community is who will care for a population that is increasingly aging. And by the way, it's great news that we have this growing number of people that are aging in our country. But the question then is, if they need help, who will provide that care? And Feinberg and Levine have talked about the caregiver support ratio, and looking in the past that in 2010, there were about 7 caregivers for every person 80 and older. By 2030, which is only, if we round up a little, is only about 8 years away, there will be 4 caregivers for every person 80 and older. And by 2050, it's anticipated there will be 3 caregivers for every person 80 and older. What we have to understand is, even though there might be 3 caregivers or 4 caregivers, that tells us nothing about their ability or their capacity to serve in that role. So the question is, even though those people are there, who will provide that support? Now, it's interesting that when we think about caregiving, caregiving is really a global issue. Just kind of it's not on the slide, but an interesting fun fact. By 2033, it's anticipated there will be more people in the country of China, 60 years of age and older, than the entire US population. China is a country that is rapidly aging, but so are other places rapidly aging, places such as Italy, Japan, Belgium, and France. Japan has one of the highest life expectancy in the world. What that means is that as a country ages, there's also a concomitant decrease in the numbers of young people that are available to provide that support. So this kind of whether or not it's interesting, it's just for a point of comparison. From a conservative standpoint, in 1975 through 80, there were 2.2 children for every mother. By 2000, that was 1.4 for children for every mother. The reason why we're looking at 2000 is these are folks now that would be of age to be caregivers. And so their existence or their lack thereof gets our attention. The other thing that I think is interesting is that when you look at this line graph and you see that in the 50s and 60s, which represents the baby boom, we had a significant fertility. The good news is we had lots and lots of babies being born, which helps to explain this photograph of St. Pius X School in the 1960s. This just happened. This was a photograph of the school that I went to. So I'm a baby boomer. I am 60. And we had over 1,600 kids in our grade school. Today, it's probably half of that or even less. And so when we think, who's going to provide support to all these folks, that should get our attention. Something else I just want to mention to you that I think is worth consideration is that for the people now that are going into the aging adult category, what we're seeing is people going into their older years childless, meaning that either they had children and they're no longer having any sort of relationship with them, or the children never existed in the first place. And so when we look at the percentage of people that are childless, particularly the people entering into the young old category, young old is 65 and older, but people who will eventually get there, about 20% are childless. For those 65 to 74, about 16% are childless, and those people 75 and older, 11% are childless. So you can see for people 75 and older, 65 to 74, they've benefited somewhat from fertility, whereas for younger people, the people that would be there to provide support just have not existed. So that becomes an important issue when we think about caregiving in the future. Some other things to take into consideration that I think are interesting for area agencies on aging and people working in the field, but also for those of you that are serving as family caregivers, this idea of where's all my support, it could be partly because that support wasn't there in the first place. We're seeing about 28% of older adults who are living alone that are childless, and that childlessness seems to be a phenomena more with older men than older women, and that people that are childless have a greater tendency to be closer to poverty than the rest of the population. So this just gives you, this particular bar graph gives you a perspective in terms of childless adults as well as the availability of parents. Now, drilling down more into caregiving, and I just tried to lay the foundation. So drilling down a little bit more, we know about 1 in 5 Americans are caregivers to an adult or to a child. That's about 53 million caregivers, which has been an increase of about 9.5 million caregivers since 2015. So this is 2020 data. we can expect the number of caregivers only to increase as the population ages. We know that more people, and how that plays out, we know that there are more people providing care to multiple people than in previous years. So about an 18% increase. What that means is that in the past, someone could have spread the wealth with other people in terms of caregiving responsibilities. And now it's more maybe on one or two people to be responsible, not only for a parent, but maybe a spouse, maybe an in-law, and so on. So we think about who is receiving care and the type of care. And by the way, here's our little chat feature. So I'm going to ask you a question. But we know that most caregivers support a relative. In fact, the majority of care that's provided in the United States in terms of long-term care is provided by families. That's today. In 5 years, 10 years, I'm not so sure what that's going to look like. So Jan, you and your team are going to have to start thinking about, all right, what else do we need to do to plan for the future? 40% of caregivers live with a family member, which may not surprise us, particularly if someone's caring for a spouse or a partner or a parent or an in-law. But what is interesting is, as in comparison to the past, caregivers are providing more complex care to care recipients with physical, emotional, mental health, and memory issues. We will probably see that only continue as we see one of the fastest growing segments of the population, 85 and older, continue to increase. The kinds of care that will be provided will also become more complex. And as you may or may not know, we know that the greatest risk factor for dementia is age. So as people get older, the likelihood of having some memory issues will increase. And so as the population of people 85 and older increases, so will the potential for some memory issues. Unless we can find people to come up with, figure out a cure, figure out a vaccine, figure out whatever it would take to address this issue. And then we know that caregivers provide approximately 24 hours of care per week. So that is an average. So if I were to ask, for those of you that are family caregivers on the phone, who are you caring for? And I'll let you get to the chat feature. So who are you caring for? A mother-in-law. All right. Thanks, Laura. As in husband and neighbors. Chris, thank you for caring for your neighbors, for your husband. Christina, for your mom. Beth, for your dad and your son. So you have the opportunity of being in that position of caring for two different generations. Mother-in-law in the past. Okay, Chris. A friend. Thank you, Lori. And Chris, thank you for caring for your mother-in-law as well. I didn't want to neglect that. Grandma, thank you. Thank you, Aubrey. And we think how important it is, all the different people that you're caring for. Beth, you mentioned for a disabled adult son, which is a unique situation because that care is lifelong. It's not for a select number of years. So when we look at average number of years of caregiving, you have the situation where it's much more long-term than maybe what other people have. Thank you all for chatting. So I want to share with you this is a graphic that comes from the National Alliance for Caregiving, as well as AARP Family Caregiving, and just to show you about caregiving, some caregiving numbers in 2020. So as we talked, we have seen an increase in the numbers of people serving as caregivers. That's from 18% to 21%. More Americans are caring for, again, more than one person. More people are having challenges in coordinating care. If there was ever a time to memorize or know the the web address for Connections Area Agency on Aging, it's today, because how much we need the Area Agency on Aging and the caregiver support to be there for us. But then also the numbers of people who are caring for people with dementia, the numbers of people who say that their health has changed as a consequence of caregiving, and then the kind of people that are caregivers. You know, in the past, if I were to say, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but who was the profile of a typical caregiver, it tended to be a middle-aged woman who was caring for a parent, or typically caring for a parent. But what we are seeing is more men who are serving in the role as caregivers, in addition to women. And so a group that may have different needs, different perspectives on the caregiving experience. Now, this is typically a slide when I talk about aging. I talk about the heterogeneity of aging, that as we age, we become more different as opposed to more alike. And yet, I think this particular slide also applies when we think about caregiving, and that's the heterogeneity of caregiving. Just when I asked the question, who are you all caring for? It was from a neighbor to a friend to a child to caring for a spouse or an in-law or grandmother. And so in itself, people are caring for different people for different reasons. There's also different demands that are tied to that caregiving. It could be I'm helping them get their bills paid, to as much as I need to make sure that their clothing is changed and they're getting bathed and so forth. So instead of lumping all caregivers together, such as we do with a snow pile, this is preparing us for winter in case anybody wondered. But when we think about that each caregiver is like a snowflake in the sense that each one is different. And so when we can open that up and understand that sometimes when people give us advice, they'll say, well, I was a caregiver for X, that we have to listen to what they offered, but appreciate what position they were in when they were providing care. Okay. So back in 1980, a seminal article on caregiver burden hit the press. And this was in the journal The Gerontologist. And it came in with rave reviews because you had Zaret, Reaver, and Bach-Peterson who were reporting that caregivers were saying that caregiver was a burden. And this idea that caregiving being a burden has pretty much entrenched itself in our thinking about the caregiving experience. Now, I'm curious, how many of you have had someone say to you that you're in a burdensome situation, or that caregiving, that they'd say, well, I couldn't do that because that has to be a burden for you? Definitely often. Okay, thank you, Chris. Anyone else? Yep, often. Thank you, Lori. You know, if you were to hear people say to you over and over again, this is a burden, why would you do this? That can start to weigh on your heart. It can start to weigh on your own thinking in terms of this role, this relationship that you're in. Well, this question about the research and how important the work that Zaret has done, because Zaret really did open up the door to our conversation about caregiving. What we also know is when we look at the research, and Beth just said that, but when she said, no, I haven't heard it, but that it must be hard. Well, that's kind of tied to what some of the literature is telling us about caregiving, the newer literature, and that is that caregiving is viewed as stressful and burdensome. But at the same time, even though people know it's stressful, and Beth, this ties into what you said, they may also, though, see gains and the grace moments, the gains and the grace moments of caregiving. So this kind of takes us into really what the title of this particular presentation, and that is Caregiving as a Time of Grace in Caring for Another. But to get there, I want to talk a little bit about the positive aspects of caregiving and what does this mean? So there was an interesting article in the Journal of Geriatric Dementia titled Positive Aspects of Caregiving and Caregiver Burden, a study of caregivers of patients with dementia. And what they came up with is this notion or this idea of PAC, positive aspect of caregiving. And what they've done is they've defined this as the gain or satisfaction feelings resulting from the caregiving experience. And I took a quote out of this particular article where they said that dependency feelings, fulfillment, bring family members closer together, companionship and more meaningful life, and spiritual moral remuneration. And this idea that, yeah, there's somewhat of a dependency, but it's not like a codependency, but more of an interdependency, but also this sense of fulfillment, this chance for family members to connect in maybe a way that they hadn't before. So I want to bring you back in and give you a chance for a little chatting. And I would be curious to know, in your own caregiving experience, what positive benefits with caregiving have you had? What positive benefits with caregiving have you had? Getting to know more about my mother. Nice, Sherry, thank you. Anyone else? Made amends before death, and that, Trish, that's a great gift. Lessons on how to age gracefully. From Lori, thank you. Chris, knowing my husband is getting the best care from the one who knows him best. Aubrey, it is an opportunity to give back all that was given. Powerful. See, these are power. So thinking about those positive benefits and seeing them for what they are can be supportive to us. Beth has said, learning more about Dad, but he has started telling me, is it that he loves you? Maybe he loves you. Oh, he loves me. Okay. And Lori, finally doing the right thing. That's powerful. He loves me. Okay. Now tell me, what has surprised you about caregiving? Is there anything that you have been, okay. Laura says to share in the love of her sons and grandchildren. All right. Anything else that has surprised you? How good it makes you feel. All right. Thank you, Jan. How much other people avoid it. There's the fainting goats. How easy it is to change hats and move into their space. You know what, Lori, that takes a really a gift to be able to do that. That's empathy. And then Chris said how to flex. And flex is flexing in terms of our own thinking about what's going on in the day, to sometimes it's the physical flexing as well, of the physicality of being a caregiver. Well, some of the research and what it has told us, and I like this work from Lloyd, Patterson, and Muirs, when they talk about what have been some of the positive aspects of caregiving. By the way, Laura just chatted in rearranging priorities. What matters to you the most? And then adjusting accordingly. So some of the things and priorities isn't on this list, but certainly could be added to it. What the literature has told us is about things such as role satisfaction, more of the emotional rewards, being able to grow personally, a sense of competence and mastery, faith and spiritual growth, relationship gains, and some of you have mentioned that, to a sense of duty and reciprocity. Caregivers' perceptions about the process of positive caregiving have talked about things like accepting the role, accepting the situation, choosing a positive caregiving attitude. And sometimes with caregiving, and it can be very difficult, and you think, I've got so many other things on my plate, and now I need to slow down. So how do I get that attitude and maintain that attitude? A commitment to the relationship, creating opportunities for growth for you, but also the person that you're caring for, and then drawing strength from from faith, past relationships, and others. And the value of that is what's come through. Now, there's a wonderful book. I'm not sure how many of you have had the chance to read this, but it was written by this beautiful, beautiful soul, Leela Knox Shanks. And Leela cared for her husband who had Alzheimer's disease up until the end of his life. And the name of the book, Your Name is Hughes Hannibal Shanks. And she had remarked that one time, as the disease was progressing with her husband, that they were together in their home here in Lincoln, and he looked over at her and said, "Do your parents know that you're here?" He didn't realize who she was, and she, in this click of in her mind, realized at that point that she could no longer be there in the role of his wife, but that this new caregiving role, thanks Chris for putting in the link, that this new caregiving role was coming about, and that was that she was moving from wife to caregiver. And that for her, by accepting that role, that gave her a different perspective, a different orientation in terms of their relationship. Now, Kleinman talks about caregiving, and this was an article in The Lancet, and said that consider how central caregiving is to what it means to be human. Caregiving is an indelible part of relations between partners, the raising of children, and response to the infirmities of aged parents and grandparents. It seems like this particular quote covers the gamut of the people that you've all identified in terms of your caregiving relationship. Now, Nancy Cobb, in her book, In Lieu of Flowers, and this is a beautiful book, she cared for both her father and her mother, who both were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. But she said, in a way, your mother was your first love affair. You knew her heartbeat, her voice, her moods, her emotion. Her eyes were the first you saw coming into this world, just as yours will be the last she sees going out of it. You are giving birth to her and to yourself as you grow to the next stage of your life. You are giving birth to her. That's about that grace of being present, the grace of providing support to another. And Nouwen, Henri Nouwen, says that to care is to be human. To be a caregiver means to allow those for whom we care to unveil our own illusions of immortality and to claim a much wider and richer understanding of life. That's a grace moment when we can see that to care is to be human. It is part of our responsibility in life. Now, there can be outcomes of grace as well. And the outcomes for things such as forgiveness. And somebody mentioned that in the chat, which was so powerful. Forgiveness for ourselves and those around us. We may not have that forgiveness moment today, but eventually that comes. To health and strength. Help and strength from others as well as ourselves. Being open to help, being willing to attend this program is one of those, it's kind of cliche, but it's one of those first steps in terms of your own acceptance of your role as a caregiver. And then time, realizing every day is a gift. One of you mentioned about that idea before the end, getting things resolved and putting things into perspective. Every day truly is a gift. And if COVID has taught us anything, is that things can change on a dime, in a heartbeat. And so the more that we can appreciate time, the better. And then, and I would say this for myself, when I was caring for my own dad, who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and he had problems, everything you can imagine from head to toe. I had to realize I had to achieve this sense of humility as a gerontologist, that I wasn't in this alone, that I had to work with my brothers to get him the care he needed, but I also needed the support of my colleagues from the Area Agency on Aging in Nebraska, to geriatricians and people with geriatric assessment. And that humility is, we're not in it alone. This particular sign that I have here, and I'm going to share another sign that I have in my office, but I found this and I thought, gosh, this makes sense. You never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. And for some people, caregiving allows them to find their strong voice, their strength voice, the strength that they didn't realize they had, to be able to move forward. Now, there's a beautiful book by Jerry Sittser, and the title of it is A Grace Disguised, How the Soul Grows Through Loss. And Dr. Sittser had experienced a number of losses in his life through a tragic car accident, but his perspective on being thrown in the responsibility of being a single parent and caring for his kids and just thinking about the future changed things appreciably. And he said that good comfort requires empathy. It forces adjustments and sometimes mandates huge sacrifices. Comforters must be prepared to let the pain of another become their own, and so let it transform them. They will never be the same after that decision. I think that's powerful when you come to the realization that you will change as a consequence. And I just want to give another shout out to Chris for being so wonderful and putting the links. Thank you, Chris, very much for what you're doing. So here's another sign in my office, and that is courage. And it also takes courage. It takes courage to care. So courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. That's John Wayne. Some of you may have remembered who John Wayne was, others not. But I like that. You know, sometimes you just have to saddle up and go. We had this kind of a, I don't know, kind of a logo, or that's not the right words that I want to use. But, you know, for someone to pursue a career in gerontology or to be a gerontologist, we said it takes courage to care. But I would say if anybody has the courage, it's caregivers. You have to have the courage to care to move forward. So something for you to note, and that is the person you have care for is changing, but so are you. Do you ever sometimes, and I had this conversation with a friend this week, and we were talking about just our own aging experience. And I had remarked about, you know, sometimes we think, gosh, I wish I could have the same figure I had when I was 20 or 25. But because of all the beautiful things that happen to us with age, notice what I said, all the beautiful things that happen to us as we age, particularly for women, we get into our 50s and 60s. The reality of getting back into that dress that we wore when we were in our 20s, not going to happen, right? But sometimes what we have to do is not only see that other people around us are changing, but that we're changing as well. That's where the grace of coming to terms with things have changed, and that's okay. So honoring the change sometimes is a bit of grieving, right? Honoring the change is a little bit of grieving. So what does it mean in terms of honoring the change or honoring the grief? By the way, when I say change, I'm not talking about the change of life, but maybe we could insert that as well. But how many of you, in terms of your own caregiving, have realized that your life is no longer your own? Your life has changed. If any of you have been parents, you know, as soon as that child came into the world, your life was no longer your own. And even today, your life is not your own. And then you come to this idea that the person you hope to be there to support you may be the person now that is needing support. So even a change in terms of our expectations need to be honored, but also grieving for what has been to now. So what used to be, what is now, and what is. And honoring this in such a way that says, all right, it didn't turn out the way that I thought. I can grieve that. I can be sad about that. But then I can also begin to think about, what else can I do with this situation? This is the cards that I've been dealt, and how can I work through it? Not get over it. And hopefully I never say that out loud. We don't get over things like loss. We learn to live with them. So how can I learn to live with this new life? So it's about finding support in your caregiving role. And that's where grace and caregiving can come into play. Now, I happened to come across this as I was preparing this particular presentation, and I thought it was powerful. And this is about a gentleman who, the inspiration behind the title, Finding Support in the Moment, was about a gentleman who cares for his wife with Alzheimer's disease. And what he has learned is that he's had to come to find joy in the moment. What happened in the past really is the past, and what could happen in the future is so unknown, none of us can predict it. But when we can appreciate the right now, it puts things into a different perspective. And what he has said is, if you cultivate and expect joy, you'll see the little things that you might otherwise take for granted. The other thing with the disease is that it's not an all or none phenomena. Now, what's interesting is when he was talking about, you'll see the little things you might otherwise take for granted. His wife is still when he first wrote about this, was still in the beginnings of the disease. There were still things that she can do, such as cooking or doing things around the house or other sorts of tasks that give her a sense of meaning and purpose. And the reason why the line, the disease is not an all or none phenomena, is sometimes when we get a diagnosis like Alzheimer's disease, we move from just the diagnosis all the way to the last stage and take away the person's dignity, take away the person's sense of meaning and purpose, because we're not sure what they can and can't do. And what this gentleman is saying, and this comes out of a website, The Spiritual Rewards of Caregiving from Guideposts, is that, again, if you cultivate and expect joy, you'll see those little things you might otherwise take for granted. Now, there's another, and this is a book that was reviewed by aarp.org on their website on caregiving. And this is about a woman, Karen Schuler, who all of a sudden found herself having to take on a caregiving role that she hadn't anticipated. And she just happens to be a wellness coach and also focuses a lot of her work on resilience. And she thought, all right, I'm in this new role now as a sudden caregiver. What I'm going to do is figure out, how can this be adapted or described from the lens or the perspective of resilience. And she came up with several suggestions that I thought might be of use to you. One is about, how do you keep your materials together? You know, we live in such an electronic age, everything's on our phone or computer, but if the power goes, we may not be able to readily access it, or if our internet is unstable. So what she's saying is, consider keeping a binder of important things such as schedules, medication, etc., that you can get your hands on quickly. Reviewing your social support. Who can support you? And who can support you with humor when you need it? You know what's wonderful about friendships? We have different friends for different reasons. And we might have that one friend who has such a great sense of humor, they can keep our mood light. A gratitude journal. What she was saying is, when through resilience, if I can write down what one thing that happened today that was good, that can give me a sense of encouragement and support. To having healthy lifestyles, lifestyles that might be going for a walk or some other exercise. You know, sometimes we think we need to get 10,000 steps in a day in order to be healthy. And sometimes we just leap to, I've got to do this all at once. Not necessarily. And in fact, what exercise scientists are encouraging people to do, and what Karen has included here, is even a 10-minute walk can be beneficial to you. during the pandemic, I wasn't able to go work out at a facility, and I just was searching around on YouTube, and there are a number of exercise clips that are out there on YouTube that you might want to think about. There's a program called Walk at Home. I'm getting no financial support from them, so there's my disclosure in case anybody thought I was getting a kickback. But what's interesting is they have different exercises that can be 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes. But again, finding a way to take care of your health. Mini breaks with finding times for maybe a 15-minute or 30-minute release. And that's not about exercise. Maybe it's just sitting and breathing. Maybe it's having a cup of tea or something, but finding a way to release. And then self-determination, the value of trusting your instincts. You know more than you realize. Your gut instincts, you got into caregiving for a reason. You know more than you realize. And then requesting help when you need it. It is okay to ask for help. I heard Jan talk about the support groups that you have available for caregivers. And sometimes just going into a group and hearing suggestions and ideas from other people can be invaluable to you. I am a firm believer, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And who you know might be, and that's going to take us to the next slide, but who you know about how you can get through this caregiving journey. So making a list of what you can and can't do, and then delegating the tasks. What she has suggested is, again, do a list and maybe take 2 columns, what I can do and what I can't do. What I can do is I can manage the house, I can call the plumber, I can advocate for my loved one. That's where that strength starts to come out. But what I can't do, I can't get up on a ladder and clean out the gutters. I can't use a heavy mower. I can't program the DVR. By the way, I don't even think you need to be a caregiver to say, I can't program the DVR. But these are the kinds of things, when you start to write out that list, the next time someone says to you, maybe over the holidays or a neighbor stops by and they say, how can I help? Have your list handy. And the person may not be able to do the tasks, but they may know somebody who could help you out. So always thinking about kind of being proactive, but having that list handy so that they can be supported. Here's what I've learned, and here's what I learned when I was caregiving myself. People want to help. They absolutely do. But sometimes they don't know what to do. Or maybe we have heard people say, call me if you need anything. Well, if I were to ask for a show of hands, how many of you had somebody say, call me if you need anything? And your mind's just scrambling, just trying to get through the day. It doesn't dawn on you to say, I need help with the gutters, or I need help with the mowing. So having that list handy can be useful. Now, some websites of value that I thought you might find interesting. And again, I cannot thank Chris enough for staying on task with me, including websites and links. One is 7 tips for handling caregiving challenges. And you can see that is what this particular website looks like. There's also caregiver support that's available at agingcare.com. So you can find that information. If you are a veteran or you are caring for someone who is a veteran, there's the VA Caregiver Support Program and their homepage, which is filled with a variety of resources that might be available. I found that with my dad, when we needed to get him evaluated, there was a long waiting list to try to get into the geriatric assessment center at the medical center. And it just happened that my dad had served during the Korean conflict and was in the Air Force. We were able to contact the VA to use their geriatric assessment in order to get in a little sooner. We didn't get in the next day. I don't want to give you that impression. But there are other ways to come up with solutions. And then, of course, there's that wonderful organization called Connections and the Caregiver Support Program. By the way, I have to compliment you on how beautiful your website is. The images and so forth are lovely. So tip of the hat. But I think the one thing is realizing that when you can reach out to an area agency on aging, what a tremendous organization it is, whether it's in Iowa, Nebraska, or anywhere across the United States. AAA's, Area Agencies on Aging, are the ones that make it happen. And I am deeply indebted to them for all the good work that they do. So I want to conclude with something. And as I was trying to find something to end this presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions, I was hoping I could find something that would touch your heart. And I just, again, thank goodness for Google and doing searches. I found something that was on the Sisters of Providence website. And kind of interesting, the Sisters of Providence are involved with a college in Indiana, St. Mary of the Woods. And anyways, so I thought it was interesting. And I'd like to share this with you, not advancing a particular agenda. You may not subscribe to the notion of God. You may believe in something else. And so what I would encourage you to do is insert what you believe. But I will stay true to the way this prayer was crafted. I should mention too that there's this prayer and that there are several other prayers included, but I thought to conclude here, this would be useful. God of love, as a caregiver, I need the grace. Here we go. I need the grace to be loving, even when I do not love all that I'm asked to do. It is extremely difficult to watch the one I love slowly lose their ability to care for themselves and to witness their pain of illness. More is demanded of my time, and sometimes there just doesn't seem to be enough of that in the day to tend to all that needs to be done. Help me to prioritize my day with being present to the person I love as I care for his or her needs and wants. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when I lay my head on my pillow, I want to say, I live this day with love. I just thought that was so powerful because it doesn't say, I want to say, I live this day by being the perfect caregiver. I live this day by being absolutely a rock star at what I'm doing, but that it all comes down to love, doesn't it? Love doesn't have to be perfect. Love has gentleness and kindness and grace and all those things in it. And believe it or not, that's what you do every day. So with that said, I'd like to open it up to comments or criticisms, suggestions, ideas. I don't want to take a prediction about the Nebraska-Iowa football game though next week. That's kind of off limits for right now. But I do want to hear your thoughts. Sherry, thank you very much. That's very generous. Thank you. Chris, thank you. I hope it wasn't too packed. I'm an academic. I got to throw it all in. And I don't know if you can do this on your end or if it has to be made available to you, but you certainly can also, and I'm going to maybe stop share. And then if anybody wants to open up, offer some conversation. Beth, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being a caregiver for 2 different generations. Tara, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, say
Oh, I saw GBR. That made my day.
say it.
Love is giving care.
Thank you. Beth, good luck to you. Thank you. Look at those beautiful faces. Hello, folks.
That was from my love that I'm caring for.
Oh, I'll tell you what, you hit the jackpot. It's good to have someone that you love and care for and that loves and cares for you back.
Each other. Us.
That's right.
Us, each other.
You know, to love each other, it's 100%, isn't it? Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your willingness to listen and participate. And to all the rest of you, as I'm clicking through and I want to see your beautiful faces. Thank you. It's so nice to see faces without masks. isn't it? Teaching with students with masks, and I never know
Is that
what
what
they're
she
thinking.
said?
Basically,
Without mask?
Yeah,
big
teaching.
advantage, big
So-
advantage of Zoom is I see the front of your head instead of the back of it in a meeting somewhere.
Yep. I am very grateful to each of you for the chance to be here and just to offer some thoughts. It is not an easy task to be a caregiver, but it's one of those journeys that when you make it with somebody else, it lightens the load. But we have to make it with somebody else. And that's where the Area Agency on Aging comes in, right? Our hands are meant. Elie Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor and has written a number of books, you know, he said our hands are meant to be open so that another can take our hand to make that journey. Mm-hmm. All right, Laura, thank you. Lori, thank you. Very good. It is about being, it's a teachable moment when we learn from our parents and that we in turn then open our hearts to receive care from somebody else. Thank you. And I'm so Spickens, Spickens. I think that might be somebody's first name and then their last name. Thank you very much. Thanks for your kindness. Debbie, thank you. Jan, anything else? Because I'll start rambling.
Julie, thank you so much. I had heard you before. That's how I knew that you needed to be on this conference, because you're awesome and you did not disappoint.
I hope not.
Not
I
at
hope not.
all. It was just so, I don't know, edifying and rewarding, and just I can tell that you have your heart is in this, and that just makes everybody else just kind of gravitate towards feeling really good about their caregiving role. And just, I mean, it's just really, thank you so much. Thank you.
You are very welcome. And I'm going to click off, but I will just say to all of you, whether you're a family caregiver, whether you're a couple, whether you're working at the AAA, you are holy people doing holy work. Thank you. All right. Have a great day, everyone. And
Thank
go
you.
Big Red.
Go Big Red!
Go Big Red. Husker Pride. Thanks, you guys. Take care.
Well, thank you, everyone. That we're to the end of our time. Chris is going to put a link in the chat session, so I hope you're able to get to it. It's just a real short survey for us, and we'd really appreciate it if you're able to fill that out. Our speakers this morning, they just did not disappoint, man. They were just really good. And for our professional caregivers that are here with us today, you will be receiving an email later on this afternoon that has an additional survey that you need to have completed in order to get your CEUs. So look for that later on this afternoon. While people are, so let's see, is the link in there, Chris, for the survey?
Nope.
I just thought Sandy, her final piece that we have, and she went to, she just did a lot to get prepared for these harp selections, and this last one will not disappoint. It's just beautiful. It's Amazing Grace. And so while you click on your link for your survey, we are going to listen to Amazing Grace. So, and then I will be hanging out if anybody wants to has any questions. Let's see here. I'm not seeing you, Chris. Just a second.
Not there.
Does anybody else see Chris? Because I can get the survey put in here too. So just a second here.
Yeah, it looks like she's falling off, Jan.
Oh, okay, okay. Sorry, everybody. Let me just get that real quickly here. Okay, there it is. And then, yeah, while you guys are completing that, like I said, I think I'm able to pull up Sandy's piece.
Jan, Chris said to please let her back in.
Oh, well, there she is. And she has it set up because I'm scrambling here. I thought I had it set up too, but I haven't been able to find it. So sorry about that. Chris, let me.
Sorry, the internet glitched.
Yeah, so if we could just pull up Sandy's last piece, Amazing Grace. I did put the link in the chat, so everybody hopefully is able to be working on that as we enjoy Amazing Grace. Chris, I don't think the sound's on.
This next piece is a well-known hymn, Amazing Grace, arranged.
Just make
for
sure
the
when you
hymn.
do the share that you have that little sound thing picked. hear it, but we don't see it.
Third time's a charm.
Yay, Chris, you have done such a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's try this one more time. Sound. Are you seeing it now, Jan?
Yes.
Yes. Tell me if you can hear it when I start.
Is a well-known hymn.
Yes.
Amazing Grace. Arranged by Rhett Barnwell.